On Thanksgiving night, I hit send on an email that would change my life forever. I did it because just hours before, the family feasting without me had called me a failure. That email was my answer, and it was worth $220 million. My name is Peggy Callahan, and for most of my life, I believed my worth was measured by the seat I was given at my family's table in Cleveland, Ohio. The Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house always had three things: a 20-pound turkey, their gleaming silverware, and a detailed list of my failures served as the main side dish. But this year, I wasn't even on the menu. My mother's voice over the phone was as cold and sharp as a November wind off Lake Erie. "Peggy, we're hosting important guests, the mayor, Stanley's law partners. You're just not ready to sit with them. Not good enough." So I stayed home. While they passed around gravy in their warm, polished dining room, I was in my grandfather's dusty workshop, the air smelling of grease and old steel. The only light was the glow of my laptop screen. At exactly 9:17 p.m., as I hit send on the proposal that had stolen years of my life, a breaking news banner flashed across the old TV in the corner. In a shocking upset, the anchor said, "The winner of the massive CLE Green City revitalization contract is a little-known local startup, Bedrock Geothermal." Then, my face was on the screen. My name. And underneath it, a number that didn't feel real. $220 million. My phone began to buzz, a frantic, angry sound on the cold workbench. They wanted me to prove I was worthy of a seat at their table. So while they were carving a bird, I had just won the contract to power their entire city. Stick around, because you're going to want to see what happened when they came knocking on my door the next morning. But before that news bulletin, before the shocking number that would change everything, my world felt very small. It was defined by the four walls of my family's expectations here in Cleveland. To understand how I ended up alone in that workshop, you have to understand the family I came from. My father, Walter Callahan, wasn't just a union boss, he was a kingmaker in this city, a man who built his power in smoky backrooms and with firm handshakes. He understood influence, tradition, and the unwritten rules of the Rust Belt elite. My mother, Doris, was his queen. As the society columnist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, her words could elevate a family or quietly ruin a reputation. Her world was one of charity galas, political fundraisers, and maintaining a flawless public image. Then there was my older brother, Stanley. He was the crown prince, a corporate lawyer with a corner office downtown, a German sedan, and a perfect, polished life that reflected all their ambitions. He was their masterpiece. And I was the project in the dusty basement. While they spoke of mergers and city council votes, my head was filled with schematics and geothermal gradients. My passion wasn't clean or prestigious. It involved dirt, machinery, and the belief that the heat buried miles beneath our feet held more power than any political connection. At dinner, when I'd try to explain my ideas, Stanley would smirk and call it my dirt-digging hobby. They didn't just misunderstand my dream, they were embarrassed by it. It was too blue-collar, too messy. It was a smudge on the perfect Callahan family portrait they had spent a lifetime painting. But in that cold, polished house, there was a sanctuary. One person who saw the fire in my ideas, not just the dirt under my fingernails. That was my grandpa, Frank. He was the complete opposite of my father. While Walter built his world with handshakes and favors, Grandpa Frank built his with a welding torch and a wrench. He was a retired machinist, a quiet inventor whose calloused hands had forgotten more about mechanics than my brother would ever learn from a textbook. His workshop was my real home. He'd listen to my wildest theories about geothermal energy for hours, not with polite amusement, but with the focused eyes of a fellow engineer. He'd grab a greasy napkin and sketch out a heat exchange system, arguing with me about fluid dynamics and pressure thresholds. "Don't ever let a man in a suit," he'd tell me, "convince you that you can't do something he doesn't have the imagination to understand." When he passed away, my family saw it as a sad but tidy end. For me, it was a beginning. He left me the workshop, its scent of motor oil and sawdust a final hug. And in his will, he left me his entire life savings, $75,000. But the real inheritance wasn't in the bank. I found it a month later, tucked away in an old steel footlocker, a leather-bound folder containing his old, expired patents. They were filled with his elegant, spidery handwriting designs for a geothermal heat exchange system so efficient, yet so simple that the modern industry had completely overlooked it. He didn't just leave me money, he left me a treasure map. He left me the key. And I knew, standing there in the silence of his workshop, that I couldn't let his legacy or mine just rust away. That $75,000 sitting in my bank account felt heavier than any fortune. It wasn't just money, it was the physical manifestation of my grandfather's entire life of 60-hour work weeks and calloused hands. It was his faith in me, turned into currency. I knew what I had to do. I sat my family down in my father's pristine study, the one that smelled of leather and authority, and I told them. I was not going back to school. I was not getting a respectable job. I was using every last cent of Grandpa Frank's money to start a company in his old workshop. The silence that followed was deafening. My father was the first to speak, his voice low and laced with a fury I knew well. "You're taking that good man's legacy and literally pouring it into a hole in the ground? This isn't a business, Peggy. It's a fantasy." My mother wrung her hands, her face pale. "What will people say? That my daughter is a glorified mechanic playing with her inheritance?" But my brother Stanley's reaction was the worst. He didn't yell. He just smirked, that slow, condescending smile. "Go ahead, Peggy, play with your toys. Call me when you're bankrupt. I might be able to get you a job in the mailroom." That was it. That was the moment I was truly on my own. The next day, I officially registered the company. I called it Bedrock Geothermal. Bedrock because it was built on my grandfather's solid foundation, and because I was betting everything, right down to the bedrock of my life, on this idea. I have to ask, have you ever had to make that choice, the one between the deafening chorus of disapproval and the quiet, terrifying whisper of your own intuition? Let me know your story below. The first 2 years of Bedrock Geothermal were not a triumphant montage of innovation. They were a brutal, lonely grind. It was just me, the 4 dusty walls of the workshop, and the ghost of my grandfather's faith staring back at me. There were 18-hour days fueled by stale coffee and the nagging echo of my brother's voice. "Call me when you're bankrupt." I watched that precious $75,000 inheritance dwindle with every circuit board I fried, every custom valve I had to order. One night, a prototype cooling system failed, spraying non-toxic, but foul-smelling glycol all over a month's worth of work. I remember just sitting on the cold concrete floor, covered in the sticky failure, and feeling my father's words of fantasy ringing in my ears. I was so close to believing him. Then, a lifeline. Not from a venture capitalist, but from a place that understood the soul of Cleveland, a local craft brewery. Great Lakes Brewing Co. was famous for its beer, but infamous for its colossal energy bills. The owner, a gruff, bearded man named Mike, heard a rumor about the Callahan girl in her grandpa's old shop. More out of curiosity than confidence, he agreed to let me install a small-scale pilot system. The risk was all mine. The day we switched it on, I held my breath. We watched the brewery's main power meter. For a moment, nothing. Then, the numbers on the digital display started to slow. Then they began to drop. And drop. A month later, Mike called. "Peggy." He boomed over the phone, his voice thick with disbelief. "You didn't just lower my bill. You cut it in half. This is the real deal." It wasn't a multi-million-dollar contract, but hearing those words, in that moment, felt like it. That brewery success was a spark in the dark. It was proof. Word began to travel through Cleveland's tight-knit business community. Another small factory signed on, then a local distribution center. For the first time since I'd cashed my grandfather's check, Bedrock Geothermal wasn't just a dream in a workshop. It was a real, growing business. But a spark doesn't just provide light, it also attracts attention. And it attracted the one person I should have been able to trust the most. My brother. What I didn't know was that Stanley's prestigious law firm represented Ohio Power and Light, the energy giant that had held a lucrative monopoly on the city for nearly a century. My little company, with its radical efficiency, was no longer just a family embarrassment. I was a direct threat to his firm's biggest client, but he didn't confront me. Stanley's attacks were never head-on. They were whispers in the right ears. Suddenly, promising meetings with investors would be canceled at the last minute. My applications for city permits got tangled in endless red tape. I felt like I was running into invisible walls. The truth came from a junior councilman's aide, a woman I'd gone to high school with. She called me late one night. "Peggy," she said, her voice hushed, "your brother has been talking to people. He's positioning your tech as unproven and a significant financial risk to the city." The air in my lungs turned to ice. This wasn't just disapproval. This was sabotage. My own brother was trying to bury my company to protect his bottom line. The fight was no longer about proving I could succeed. It was about surviving him. Have you ever had a moment like that? When you realize the person you're supposed to trust most is the one secretly trying to tear you down. The sting of that betrayal is something else entirely. Fighting a ghost is exhausting. For weeks, I felt like that's all I was doing, spending my days in meetings, trying to undo the damage my own brother was doing in his private lunches and backroom conversations. I was presenting data, showing the success at the brewery, trying to combat the lies he was spreading. But through it all, I held on to a small, naive hope. I thought that business was business, but family was family. That surely, behind the closed doors of our home, the competition would melt away. Thanksgiving was coming, and I pictured a temporary truce over turkey and stuffing. I thought, just for one day, we could be a family again. How wrong I was. The call came on a Tuesday, a week before the holiday. It was my mother. Her voice had that airy, overly polite tone she always used when she was about to say something terrible. "Peggy, darling," she started. "About Thanksgiving this year. Stanley is bringing the senior partners from his firm, and we've just had confirmation that the mayor will be stopping by for dessert." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew what was coming. It's just, well, with the guest list being what it is, and your situation being so uncertain, it would be for the best if you sat this one out. We need everything to be perfect. She didn't say the words, "You would embarrass us," but she didn't have to. I was a loose thread on her perfect tapestry. A problem to be hidden away while she and my father entertained the very people who held my future in their hands. That was when I finally understood. My brother was trying to destroy my company. But my mother, she was trying to erase me. After that phone call with my mother, something inside me broke. For the first time, I truly considered quitting. I sat alone in the workshop, surrounded by my life's work, and felt nothing but the crushing weight of defeat. My brother had poisoned the well at City Hall. My parents had made it clear I was a pariah. What was the point? I had the better technology, I had the data, but I didn't have the name or the connections. Stanley had won. For a full 24 hours, I didn't touch a single tool. I just let the cold silence of the workshop swallow me whole. Then, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Is this Peggy Callahan?" a man's gruff voice asked. "My name is George Nowak. I sit on the city's development committee." My heart stopped. "More importantly," he continued, "I was an apprentice under your grandfather Frank at the old Chevy plant 30 years ago. He told me he remembered Grandpa as a man of integrity, a genius who never cut corners. He said he'd been watching my proposal get systematically buried by a series of flimsy concerns that smelled rotten to him." "Your grandfather didn't raise a fool, and he didn't build junk," George said. "I know your brother has everyone running scared, but the official vote is the Monday after the holiday. I can't promise a miracle, but I can give you a shot. If you can get me a revised proposal, one that answers every single one of their bogus safety claims with hard data, by midnight on Thanksgiving, I'll personally walk it into the right hands Friday morning." A shot. It was a 1 in a million shot with a 48-hour deadline. But it was all I had. The moment I hung up with George Nowak, the despair evaporated. It was replaced by a single, sharp point of focus. A 48-hour deadline. A fighting chance. I made one phone call. Not to my family, but to the only person who had been in the trenches with me from the start, my partner, Gus. Gus was a brilliant, foul-mouthed engineer who'd been fired from his last job for telling a VP his idea was aerodynamically impossible and morally bankrupt. He was already halfway to his sister's house for the holiday. I explained the situation, the impossible deadline. He was silent for a moment, then just said, "I'm turning around," and the line went dead. Thanksgiving Day was a blur of controlled chaos. While the rest of the city was drowsy with the smell of turkey and pumpkin pie, our workshop hummed with the electric tension of a battle command center. Gus, fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury, tore through their technical objections, running new simulations and pulling up geological data that proved their safety concerns were a sham. I was on the other side of the room, rewriting the entire 120-page proposal, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I weaponized our data from the brewery, turning every one of Stanley's whispers into a footnote backed by irrefutable proof. The hours bled together. At around 7 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Thinking of you. Hope you're having a pleasant day." I looked at my hands, stained with ink and grease, at the frantic equations covering the whiteboard, and a grim smile touched my lips. It wasn't pleasant. It was war. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, we were preparing to fire the final shot. At 11:58 p.m., with 2 minutes to spare, it was done. Gus was asleep on a pile of old shop rags in the corner, utterly spent. It was just me. My finger hovered over the mouse. My entire life, the inheritance, the lonely nights, the failures, my grandfather's legacy, it was all compressed into a single 80-megabyte attachment. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of cold coffee, and I clicked, send. And then, nothing. The adrenaline drained away, leaving a hollow, buzzing exhaustion. I slumped back in my chair, too tired to move, too wired to sleep. The workshop was silent again, the only light coming from the old television droning on in the corner. I had fired my shot. Now there was nothing left to do but wait for the impact. I must have drifted off, because I was jolted awake by the sharp, jarring sound of a breaking news jingle. My eyes snapped to the TV. A stern-looking anchor was speaking. "We have a stunning, late-breaking development from City Hall tonight concerning the city's landmark CLE Green Energy Project." I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. "While the official vote isn't scheduled for certification until Monday," she continued, "multiple sources have now confirmed that, in a shocking upset, a surprise winner has been selected. The contract has been awarded to a small, local startup. Bedrock Geothermal. My name." She said my company's name. Then a picture of me, one they must have pulled from a local business journal, flashed onto the screen. Underneath it, a banner that seemed to burn through the glass. Contract valued at $220 million. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The world went silent. I thought of my family, just a few miles away, sleeping soundly after their perfect dinner. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just earned a seat at their table. I had just bought the entire building it was in. Sleep never came. How could it? My phone, which had been deafeningly silent from my family for months, was now buzzing itself into oblivion. Calls and texts from reporters, venture capitalists, even my third-grade teacher. By 8 a.m., a local news van was parked across the street, a clear sign that my old life was officially over. Gus and I were on our third pot of coffee, just trying to process the tidal wave, when a polished black Lincoln sedan pulled up in front of the workshop. A car I knew all too well. The workshop door creaked open, and the smell of expensive cologne and hairspray cut through the familiar scent of motor oil. There they were. My father, Walter, in a crisp suit, beaming as if he'd just won an election. My mother, Doris, clutching her pearls and trying desperately not to let her designer heels touch a grease spot on the floor. And my brother, Stanley, holding a box of gourmet donuts like a white flag. "Peggy," My father boomed, his arms open wide. We saw the news. We came as fast as we could. I always told you that Callahan grit would pay off. My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. We are just bursting with pride, darling. Bursting. Your father was telling the mayor just how innovative you were at dinner the other night. It was the most blatant lie I had ever heard. Stanley stepped forward, placing the donuts on a clean spot on the workbench. This is big league, Peg, he said, his eyes scanning the workshop not with pride, but with the cold calculation of an investor. You're going to need proper guidance to manage this. I can make some introductions. I just stood there, silent, watching the performance. They weren't there to celebrate with me. They were there to claim me. I let his offer of introductions hang in the dusty air. I looked at the box of donuts, then at his perfectly manicured hands. I finally met his eyes. The guidance you're offering now, Stanley, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Is it the same kind of guidance you were giving your contacts at City Hall last week? The color drained from his face. My mother's hand flew to her pearls. What are you talking about, Peggy? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I turned to her. You were bursting with pride last night, Mom? Funny, I seem to recall a different conversation. One where I wasn't good enough to sit at your table. One where my life's work was a potential embarrassment that needed to be hidden from the mayor. I then looked at my father, whose booming confidence had vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. And this Callahan grit you're suddenly so proud of, Dad. You called it a fantasy when I was living on ramen noodles to fund it. You called it a hole in the ground to pour my inheritance into. I turned my gaze back to Stanley, who was now staring at the floor. You didn't just disapprove, you actively worked against me. You tried to poison the well. You tried to make sure I failed. I took a step closer, the truth feeling like steel in my spine. Don't stand here and pretend you're proud of me. You're proud of a number you saw on a TV screen. You didn't come here for me. You came to get a closer look at $220 million. The silence in the workshop was so thick I could feel it. The three of them just stood there, their carefully constructed masks of pride and concern shattered on the floor. For the first time in my entire life, I had rendered them speechless. My father, the kingmaker, had no words. My brother, the master negotiator, had no counter-argument. It was my mother who finally broke, her voice a desperate, wounded whisper. But Peggy, we're your family. It was the last card they had to play. The one they had always used to guilt me, to control me, to remind me of my obligation to them. But it didn't work anymore. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a profound and sudden clarity. Family? I said, my voice even and calm. Family shows up when you're covered in glycol and despair, not just when the news vans arrive. Family cheers for you from the cheap seats. They don't hide you away so you don't embarrass them in the skybox. I walked over to the heavy oak workbench my grandfather had built and laid my hand flat on its worn, scarred surface. This is my family. This workshop. His tools. His belief in me. This is the only inheritance I ever needed. I looked up, meeting each of their eyes. My grandfather left this property to me. He trusted me with it. And you are no longer welcome here. I want you to leave. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The power in the room had shifted, and we all knew it. They left without another word, leaving behind only a box of untouched donuts on a workbench that was, finally and completely, mine. Drawing a boundary like that is one of the hardest and most liberating things in the world, isn't it? Watching that black car disappear down the street wasn't the triumphant, fist-pumping victory I might have imagined. It was just quiet. A deep, profound silence settled into the workshop, filling the space where the noise of their expectations had lived for so long. And in that quiet, I finally knew what I had to do next. The contract, the money, the success, it was never just about proving them wrong. It was about proving my grandfather right. It was a chance to build the kind of world he believed in, a world where the quality of your work matters more than the zip code you live in. 6 months later, Bedrock Geothermal was thriving. We were hiring dozens of local engineers and machinists, bringing a new kind of energy to the heart of the Rust Belt. And with the first major profits from the Nexus deal, I launched the project that mattered most to me. I stood on a stage, not for a press conference, but in the auditorium of a local community college, and announced the formation of the Frank Callahan Innovation Fund. I endowed it with an initial $5 million, not for Ivy League graduates, but for students in trade schools, apprentices in machine shops, and young inventors tinkering in their garages across Ohio. It was a fund for the outsiders, the ones with grease under their fingernails and brilliant ideas that didn't fit into a neat little box. It was the cheering section I never had. My grandfather taught me that genius isn't born in a boardroom, it's forged in a workshop. I wanted to ensure that no one else with that fire would have it extinguished by the cold winds of disapproval. Who was the one person who fanned your flames when everyone else was trying to blow them out? Honor that person in the comments below. It's funny, you spend the first half of your life believing that family is the one you're born into, a story that's already written. You learn later that true family is the one you build, one trusted connection at a time. My life now is fuller than it ever was in that big, empty house. It's filled with late-night debates with Gus over new drilling techniques, his loud, honest laughter echoing in a workshop that never feels lonely anymore. He's the brother I deserved, the one who celebrates my wins and tells me when my ideas are terrible. It's filled with monthly lunches with George Nowak, who still calls me Frank's kid and gives me gruff advice on navigating City Hall. It's filled with the bright, eager faces of the kids from our scholarship fund, who bring their own crazy inventions to the workshop on Saturdays. As for the family I was born with, I hear they're doing just fine. They still attend the galas, still have the important dinners. They live in the same city, but it feels like a different universe. Their silence, which used to be a weapon they used against me, is now just quiet. A quiet that has allowed healthier things to grow in its place. I finally understand that they couldn't see me, not because I was a failure, but because their definition of success was too small to contain my dreams. I spent all those years fighting for a seat at their table, only to realize I was never meant to sit there. I was meant to be here, at my grandfather's workbench, building a bigger table for everyone else who's been told they're not good enough. And that feeling of belonging, the one you build yourself, is worth more than any inheritance. So, that's the story. The story of how being uninvited from a single dinner led me to a life I never could have imagined. It's a story about contracts and geothermal energy, but underneath it all, it's a story about the warmth we carry inside ourselves and the coldness we sometimes have to walk away from. People often ask if I feel a sense of triumph, or if what happened to my family was some kind of cosmic justice. The truth is, I don't see it as revenge. What happened was simply cause and effect. They built their lives on a fragile foundation of exclusion and judgment, and in the end, they simply excluded themselves from my world. Their punishment wasn't a dramatic event. It's the quiet, shrinking world that is the natural consequence of a closed heart. It taught me that family is a complicated thing. Blood connects you, but it doesn't define you, and it certainly isn't a blank check for respect. True family are the people who see the fire in your eyes when everyone else only sees the mess you're making. It's the family you choose, the one you build with shared dreams and mutual support. And that brings me to the final lesson. Forgiveness. I don't know that I'll ever share a Thanksgiving dinner with my parents and brother again. But I have forgiven them. Not for them, but for me. I forgive them for not being what I needed them to be. Because holding on to that bitterness was like carrying a piece of their cold, polished world into my warm, vibrant workshop. And I needed my hands free. I was too busy building something new. So if you're out there, feeling like you're not enough, I want you to remember this. Your value is not decided by a committee or a family vote. It is forged in the fire of your own passion. Keep building. Thank you so much for listening.